Hey, bestie. It's time for your next session of Real Talk Friend Therapy with your favorite big sister auntie queen, Daysha Veronica. Hey, y'all. What's good? Happy Halloween to all my American peeps. I have always loved Halloween, but let me tell y'all, this year it has been so hard for me to get into the spirit. I don't know about y'all, but I'm exhausted. I have so much election anxiety, but I can't not watch the news. It weirdly comforts me to be in the know, but it's also equally as tiring. My boyfriend hates it. He was like the other day, can we please do less CNN? Not no CNN, but just significantly less. And I was like, you know what? That's fair. But I think part of my exhaustion is knowing that regardless of who wins, things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. And I'm just like, y'all, let's just skip it. Let's skip it. I am over 2024 at this point. If we gave years of our lives Yelp reviews, this year would get 1 star. Okay, it would get 4 stars for drama. I mean, this year was the epitome of dramatic, true page turner by the day. This is going to be the year that future generations are going to ask us about when we're old, and they're just going to be like, oh my gosh, how did you get through it? And honestly, I don't know. It has truly felt like a slog to get through. But as far as just how much I've enjoyed going through all of this drama, 1 star. Would not do this year again. But it gets that 1 star, at least for me, because I did start Real Talk Friend Therapy this year, and it has truly been the light in my life in these hella dark ass times. I kept saying for the longest that I wanted to do it, and so I'm so glad I did it before shit with the election got crazy and before I got unemployed, because it's really given my day and my week a sense of routine that can get lost when you're unemployed. But yeah, we're gonna make it through, y'all. 2025 is gonna be our year. I feel it. It's gotta be. Also, can we take a second to acknowledge that it's gonna be 2025, y'all? It's been 5 years since the pandemic, and time has been moving so weirdly fast and slow at the same time. I remember when they were saying that we wouldn't have a sense of normalcy in life until 2023, 2024. And this was in 2020. And everyone was just like, oh my God, that's so far away. 2024, what? And now we are a hop, skip, and a jump away from 2025. Halfway through the decade from hell. Okay, so for our last episode under our spooky season theme, I thought it would only be fitting to talk about vulnerability. Because I find that there is nothing we fear more as human beings than being vulnerable. It is disgustingly uncomfortable to be vulnerable. If given the option of jumping off a cliff or being vulnerable, I'm pretty sure 60% of people would choose jumping off that cliff, maybe more. But at the same time, vulnerability is such a key component of relationship building. It really sets the stage for intimacy and trust to grow in a relationship. It's also so fascinating because I've been reading up on vulnerability for this episode, and I had to tap big sister auntie queen Brené Brown. If you're new to Brené Brown, let me tell you, Brené is that girl, all right? I am obsessed with Brené ever since I read Daring Greatly when I was 21, 22 years old. Homegirl truly changed my life. She is a researcher, I want to say, in shame, vulnerability, all the really hard emotions. Brené researches that, and she writes amazing books about it. So highly recommend Brené Brown. And in her book, Daring Greatly, she talks about how in her research, she found that while most people despise being vulnerable, we love when people are vulnerable with us. She writes that we love seeing raw truth and openness in other people, but we're afraid to let them see it in us. We're afraid that our truth isn't enough, that what we have to offer isn't enough without the bells and whistles, without editing and impressing. Also, y'all might hear some dogs in the background. Pumpkin is here. are. So Pumpkin and Harlow are having their rendezvous time. It's been a while actually since they've seen each other. So, and if you're new here, Pumpkin is basically, so Pumpkin is Becky's dog. Becky is also here. And Becky is obviously Harlow's auntie. And so we call Pumpkin Harlow's cousin lover because Pumpkin loves Harlow. Like, Harlow is definitely her man, but she's also his cousin. So, you know, it's a little Appalachia for you, but but yeah, so she's here. You might hear her in the background. Back to the episode. As the cliche goes, we want to, when it comes to vulnerability, we want to have our cake and eat it too. Which, side note, y'all have to know this about me. I fucking hate this cliche. I use it because of what it represents and the common understanding that we all have about it. But let me tell you, my logical brain gets so mad when I say it. Like, what the fuck else would I do with the cake? Can somebody answer that for me? Who the hell was giving out cake and not expecting anyone to eat it? And then, why did we all decide to be on the side of the person who was mad about the cake being eaten as if that was some blasphemous shit to do when you are given cake? I cannot. All right, but getting back on track, vulnerability is so important to the health of our friendships and relationships, but I believe part of the reason why we collectively hate experiencing it so much is because of our misconceptions about what it is and what it looks like. So let's talk about what it is, what it isn't, and how it can help us improve our friendships. And then in a future episode, I will chat with a mental health expert on why it's so hard and what we can do to practice vulnerability in our lives. Okay, so y'all know how I do. And if you're new here, the first thing I love to do when starting off a discussion is take a trip to the dictionary. I'm a huge word nerd, and I think there's a lot to learn from a word when we look at its etymology or history. You know, that's my $5 word for the day. Okay, maybe 10. So Merriam-Webster writes, capable of being physically or emotionally wounded and open to attack or damage. But then they also have this like cute little did you know section that expands upon the history that I think is really interesting. So they wrote, vulnerable comes from the Latin noun vulnus, meaning wound. Fun fact, actually, the letter V in Latin is actually pronounced with what we would assign to the letter W. So it would technically be pronounced walnus. You're welcome for anyone who was looking for that random trivia fact. But vulnerability in our present day continues to carry its original meaning of capable of being physically wounded, but since the late 1600s, it has also been used figuratively to suggest a defenselessness against non-physical attacks. In other words, someone or something can be vulnerable to criticism or failure, as well as literal wounding. Cambridge Dictionary defines it as able to be easily physically or mentally hurt, influenced, or attacked. And dictionary.com defines it as capable of or susceptible to being attacked, damaged, or hurt, open to moral attack, criticism, temptation, etc. A place that is open to assault or difficult to defend. And then lastly, willing to show emotion or allow one's weaknesses to be seen or known. Okay, so taking all of these definitions into consideration, I would say that I see vulnerability as being when we are so emotionally open with others that, in theory, we run the risk of being hurt or attacked or wounded. It is when we dare to be seen or known as our authentic selves, right along with the palpable possibility of being rejected or attacked for it. It is displaying a level of honesty or truth with another person because while they technically could use this information against us, we are taking a risk in telling them because we believe that they won't. If we were dogs, it's basically us showing our belly, our tender side, and hoping to get rubs instead of kicks, right? So Brené Brown defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And this is why I think it can be so terrifying to express, because of that uncertainty. Our brains hate uncertainty because uncertainty is uncomfortable. It goes against our primitive desire to be safe. And when we can be certain, we can ensure our safety. We'll get more into this when we talk about what vulnerability is not, but a key thing I want to emphasize here is the risk aspect. When we're vulnerable, we're taking a risk, but I would argue it's a calculated risk, or at least it should be. It is not just being open and exposed to anyone who will listen, but rather it's us taking in cues about the particular moment we are in and the person we are with, and deciding whether or not we think this person is worthy of seeing our tender side. Yes, uncertainty is uncomfortable, but if we have really done our due diligence and clocked moments in the past in which this person has shown trustworthiness and kindness and all the other positive traits that make for a great friend, then yes, we're taking a risk, but we also increase our chances of this being a moment of greater depth in the relationship rather than future harm. Because here's the real talk, okay? Here's the thing. We don't know people until we know people, okay? If you know, you know. Everyone has the potential to harm us in some way. Your mama, your cousins, your aunties. More on aunties later. But there's no perfect way to determine that someone is going to hold our secrets or throw what we say back in our faces, because we're human, we're emotional. You can do all of the risk assessment in the world and still have that person who showed all of the great signs of being trustworthy actually come back and do damage. That is actually the point of vulnerability, however. We are revealing our kryptonite, our Achilles heel, our flawed human parts, in exchange for love and connection and belonging, so that there is a sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? There is a sense of protection that a person feels towards guarding that side of you. So I'm not trying to downplay the risk assessment part. I definitely think we should be making informed judgment calls when it comes to sharing that side of ourselves with others. But this makes me think of that old quote that goes, "It's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all." This quote is actually, to me, the essence of vulnerability in a nutshell, and I think it ties back into a point that Brene brings up in Daring Greatly. She writes that when it comes to love, waking up every day and loving someone who may or may not love us back, whose safety we can't ensure, who may stay in our lives or may leave without a moment's notice, who may be loyal to the day they die or betray us tomorrow, that is vulnerability. Love is uncertain. It is incredibly risky, and loving someone leaves us emotionally exposed. Yes, it's scary, and yes, we're open to being hurt. But can you imagine your life without loving or being loved? You go, Brene. Yes, girl. Asking them questions, the real tough questions. So we can never lose the risk and uncertainty element when making a new friend. However, even for all the relationships we have that go south, I can at least say that I am a much better person after having gone through all of that hurt and taking the risk to be loved and seen by that person. Do I wish there was another way to learn some of these lessons? Of course. But I agree with that quote that I'd always rather put myself in a position to be potentially hurt than to never know the beauty of love and connectedness and belonging. And this is making me realize that we'll have to do an episode on intuition and friendship in the future, because if you have a strong sense of intuition, and I know people think this is a woo-woo word, but it's not as woo-woo as you think, but if you have a more developed sense of your intuition, you'll actually be able to make these risk assessments with more certainty. Not perfect certainty, but definitely a greater sense of it. Because if you've read Gavin de Becker's book, it's called The Gift of Fear, then you'll know that our intuition, yes, it's gut feelings, but those gut feelings aren't coming out of the ether. He proposes that these gut feelings are actually our brain processing information faster than we have the ability to comprehend. So we get this loud feeling as a way of making us more alert until our brain can catch up to the information that we've processed. He argues that it's actually one of our greatest innate innate safety mechanisms that we often get in the way of because of the societal pressure to over-rationalize. And I have to say, it's truly one of the most impactful books I've ever read, and I truly believe every woman should read this book. He approaches it from a more like safety perspective and like how to basically think like a predator, but think like a predator in a way so that you know that you're not doing the things that predators are looking for. And let me tell you, all my kids, all my grandkids, everybody's reading this book. So highly recommend. But bringing us back to vulnerability and why we hate it, it's this common belief that to be vulnerable is to be weak. Now, being vulnerable is exposing our flaws. It is exposing a side of ourselves that could be attacked. But ironically, when someone is being vulnerable with us, I want you to think, what is the first thing we say? We say, wow, that was so brave of you to do. We commend them on being courageous. Despite not wanting to see it in ourselves, we see strength and we see courage when others are vulnerable. And that's because vulnerability is actually one of the greatest forms of strength we can display. Within Daring Greatly, Brene talks a lot about how this misconception of vulnerability being seen as weak comes from our society's disdain towards expressing feelings. We don't like to express emotions that are not anger in our culture. It's cool to cuss someone out or to troll someone, but it's not cool to tell people that their actions might have hurt you or made you feel sad. In fact, I'd actually say we only really allow room for people to be angry, happy, or chill, and that any other emotional expression is frowned upon, or we shit talk like, oh my god, can you believe she said my words were hurtful? It was just a joke and she just needs to stop being so sensitive. Like, I can't tell you how many times I was gaslit by a former quote-unquote friend who would just say the most rude and obnoxious shit, but in the guise of being of service to me. And when I would say, hey, that shit is fucking rude, he would be like, well, that's just how it is. Or, something along the lines of stop being so sensitive. Stop being so sensitive is real talk, a manipulator's way of saying, stop holding me accountable to taking care of your feelings. I don't want to be held responsible for what I say and how it impacts you. I just want to be able to say it, but also, weirdly enough, force you to hear it without having an opinion on it. It's fucking crazy work. And it honestly reminds me of my beef with the idea of cancel culture. I don't think cancel culture exists, okay? I think accountability culture exists in America, at least for the time being. Who the fuck knows what will happen after the election? But at this current moment, everyone in America has freedom of speech. They have the ability to say exactly what's on their mind, however they want to say it. But what I find that so many people are nostalgic for is the fact that there was a time when we, and when I say we, I mean white men or rich white men, any combination of the sort, but they were men, could say and do crazy shit. And we didn't have public real-time forums where people could say, hey, that was some crazy ass shit you just said, or some crazy ass racist shit you just said, or crazy ass homophobic shit. Because it's not like we weren't thinking that. It's just that there used to be less ways for that information to get to you. And so it felt like we were, quote unquote, less sensitive back in the day, when really we were just less connected. Like, a couple years ago, my boyfriend and I, we had gotten into watching stand-up, and we wanted to, I think it was on Netflix, and we saw that they were showing Eddie Murphy's stand-up, and so we're like, okay, why don't we give it a shot? I kid you not, I was blown away at, so Eddie Murphy was being extremely homophobic, and it was homophobic to the point where, and he just kept doing it. And so we were like, all right, this joke is kind of old and tired, and he's been doing it for the last 10, 15, 20 minutes. So let's just skip forward to some other parts in the stand-up. And I kid you not, I am not shitting you. We just kept going forward, and he was still, I think the whole stand-up special was this one trick pony about him making this homophobic joke. I can't even remember what it was, but he was just being so crazy homophobic. And I was like, wow, they recorded this man for, what was it? It must have been 90 minutes. And he basically just said the same thing over and over and over. And it wasn't even funny. Like, that was the other thing. I was like, what is happening? And again, we saw this in like 20 something, and it was filmed in like 1980 something or 1990 something. So it's not that people weren't like, what the fuck is this guy doing? It's just that we didn't have the means to tell you, what the fuck are you doing? And so when we think about this in connection with vulnerability, a lot of us have problems with being vulnerable because we were taught that to express feelings outside of what is commonly acceptable is to show weakness. It is to admit that you're not strong enough or composed enough to handle someone's criticism or someone's quote unquote real talk, rather than that other person not being mature enough to express their thoughts with a sense of humanity. Brown writes that it starts to make sense that we dismiss vulnerability as weakness only when we realize that we've confused feeling with failing and emotions with liabilities. But I really want to emphasize that to express that someone has hurt you or made you feel bad about yourself is not a weakness. I love that Brene is a word nerd like me, and she includes the definition of weakness, which is defined by Merriam-Webster as being the inability to withstand attack or wounding. And she argues that from a linguistic perspective, it's clear that vulnerability and weakness could not be further apart in meaning, and that one could argue that weakness often stems from a lack of vulnerability, that if we're unwilling to acknowledge or if we allow ourselves to be unaware of where our tender spots exist, then we actually increase our risk of being hurt by others. So back in May, I went home for an old friend's wedding, and it was also the first time that the majority of my family was meeting my boyfriend. I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast, but I am half Bayesian, half Nigerian, woo woo, and my boyfriend is white, although the verdict is still out on how completely white he is, because let me tell you, homeboy tans and is often thought of to be Mexican depending on what his facial hair is doing, so we still need to do a 23andMe. The verdict is still out on that one. But anyway, we were staying with my Nigerian side of the family, and I warned him before we went that Nigerians, but especially the women, the aunties, they can be real blunt, like brutally blunt. And for whatever reason, I've noticed in my family, my Nigerian side of the family, that the women love to call out when you've gained weight. Now, women calling out weight gain is a universal thing across many cultures, but among my Nigerian family in particular, I've just noticed that literally, so they will say hi to you, and then the next words out of their mouth will be, "When did you get so fat?" Like, it's insane. There's no, "Hi, how are you?" or "What have you been up to?" It's just in this order. "Hi, oh my God, you've gotten so fat. Would you like some rice?" It's like clockwork, like literally in that order. And since the pandemic, I've gained a lot of weight. It's something I'm very clearly aware of. And I told my boyfriend, I was like, look, someone is probably going to talk about my weight gain. And I don't know why, but COVID somehow has given people more empathy for weight gain. Like when I was last home, and this happened with my stepmom, I was like, yeah, COVID did a number on me. And surprisingly, it ended the conversation. So I said to him, I was like, I'll just say, COVID, and that should be the end of it. But of course, one of my aunties, and this heifer is not even blood, I just needed to put that out there because she was being so trifling. She just said the most horrific things that I will not repeat. And she said them in front of me and my boyfriend and my dad and my uncle. And she said all these horrific things about my weight. And when I tell you that my flabbers were gasted, okay, let me tell you, homegirl had nerve, okay, considering she was not that trim as I remember her being, okay? And I'll tell you, it's always the ones that are never in great shape calling you out. But since they know, since you're not as heavy as them, hold on, I'm getting my words twisted. Because they are not as heavy as you, they get this superiority complex. I feel like they're just kind of like, oh, they're like, I'm the fat one, but now I'm not the fat one, you're the fat one. And I don't know. It's crazy work again. Crazy. But in that moment, I can't tell you how shocked and hurt and embarrassed I was. Like, the room literally fell silent as she just kept going on and on and on. And then, like I said, eventually segued into offering us food, like clockwork. But we had to make it to the wedding. And so as soon as I could have a moment alone with my boyfriend, I was like, look, this may be tough to watch, but I just need to cry for a minute because I am struggling real hard with what my aunt said to me. And he was like, oh my God, of course. And I bring up this moment because it taught me a really valuable lesson about vulnerability and weakness and my own struggles with it throughout my life. Because growing up, I was seen as the crybaby. I was seen as the overly sensitive one. And because I hated the stigma that came along with being emotionally expressive, I began to emotionally stifle myself, going as far as engaging in cutting and self-harm as a way of controlling my emotions. And so at the time that she did this, I had just started reading Platonic. And that is a book that I mention a lot here on the podcast because it's all about the history of friendship and specifically attachment styles, which we'll also go over in a future episode. And one of the things that Platonic really opened my eyes to was this idea that the love we have with our friends, and honestly just the love we have with people in general in our life, can be so powerful because it transcends the physical and allows us to love that person for their soul. And I think that this can and should apply to family and, like I said, just anyone else, because as we get older, our family becomes more and more of a choice. And what I mean by that is it becomes less about having to put up with people because they're quote unquote blood and blood is thicker than water and all that BS. And I find that we, especially in America, we make family more about being around people who make us feel safe and seen. Now, I had not seen this woman, this auntie of mine, in several years. And in the span of that time, we went through a global pandemic where thousands of people were dying by the day. It was a moment in time where you had no idea who was going to survive and if the last time you saw someone was going to be the last time you saw them forever, right? And it's just so hard for me to reconcile that there are people who experienced this same life-changing, once-in-a-lifetime moment and came out of it on the other end, still doing the same shit and still being the same basic bitches. Again, she's not blood, so I can say that. And the funny thing is that before she did that, I didn't even think about, her being blood or not blood. I saw her as my family. But when she came out and said what she said and made me realize that she will never be able to see me beyond my physical, that she couldn't be happy for the fact that I just survived this horrific collective moment where I could have died and she might not have seen me ever again. I was like, oh, bet. She's my uncle's wife. That ain't my auntie. That's my uncle's wife. But I bring up this moment because it haunts me that instead of having that emotional moment with her and forcing her to bear my humanness so that she might think twice about what she says to people, I kept telling myself in that moment, don't cry. Don't you let that bitch see you cry, because if she sees you cry, then you'll be weak and you'll give her room to pity you. And I truly hate that I did that. I hate it because people need to remember that we are all humans and you don't just get to say what you want to say about others with impunity. You have the freedom to say what you want to say, but that freedom does not give you the right to say it without criticism. Like, I'm very aware that someone in the family could hear me calling her a bitch and a heifer and all this shit, and I could get heat for that. Someone could try to hold me accountable for that. And they would totally be within their right for doing that. I'm not going to sit here and say that I should get to call her out her name with impunity. But you best believe I'm going to soak up all this freedom of speech while I can, okay? Because what she said was fucked up, and I can criticize her for that. She doesn't just get to say hurtful shit to me because she quote unquote cares about my health. Newsflash, I also give a shit about my health too. Like, she only saw me in a flashpoint of my life. Who's to say that I'm not exercising and eating well and losing weight? Yeah, I may be a bigger size than what you last saw, but you don't just drop weight overnight. It's a process, which means I'm still gonna look big for a while. But to assume and make comments that I don't care about my health just because I'm bigger than what I used to be, and not even ask questions like, girl, bye. Like, I don't have time for that. No one has time for that. And my boyfriend asked me after it happened, he said, would it be helpful to have a conversation with her about what she said? And it was an interesting question to be posed in that moment. I ultimately said no because, again, I did a risk assessment and I said to myself, well, I don't see this woman often enough, and it's a deeply ingrained cultural thing, both in terms of being Nigerian and a woman, and I should really say being a woman of her age. I find that for older women like Gen X and above, that weight is it's a really sensitive topic for them. I think there was a lot of social stigma about gaining weight that they collectively, I have noticed, I think have a harder time not being judgmental about weight gain. And then she's also of an age and a culture where I feel like she's not going to hear me and she's going to make excuses. And ultimately, I felt like there was no depth in the relationship to be gained. I didn't think having a conversation would make us closer for me to justify risking my feelings being hurt again. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it would be a great growth opportunity for her, but she's gonna have to get that growth moment from someone else because I'm personally not invested enough in the relationship to want to see her grow. And that's kind of where I arrived at. So now she's my uncle's wife. But on a positive note, it did increase the closeness and sense of belonging that I have with my boyfriend, because in the past, I would have gone and cried in a room by myself and then come back and acted like everything was okay. But again, I did another risk assessment and I was like, no, I'm gonna cry in front of him in the hopes that he will make me feel better and this will increase a sense of intimacy in our relationship. And he did. And our relationship deepened in such a beautiful way in that moment. It unlocked a whole new level of trust and intimacy for me that I never allowed myself to have with a romantic partner before. And so when I think about what Brene brings up about how not knowing our weaknesses can create more hurt, I'm like, girl, hell yeah. Like with my weight, I know that it's a tender spot for me. I am not unwilling to acknowledge that my fluctuating weight is hard on my self-esteem. But after this happened, it did give me clarity that there was still more healing that I needed to do about it that I didn't realize was still there. Because if you've ever been a bigger person in this world, then you know what it means to be forced into having thicker skin. And I love seeing women who can roll with the punches and who can zig right when their haters zag and just troll the shit out of them. There's a part of me that really admires that and wants to embody that energy, but some of us just aren't built for that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it is just, it's really unfair that bigger people in this world have to kind of learn how to be tough, right? With their emotions, because other people can't learn to see beyond the physical. Some of us want to be soft. Some of us want to be tender. Some of us want to be like, hey, bitch, that fucking sucked what you said, you know? So again, because of the stigma that our society has about emotions, I totally understand why it can be so, like, you admire people who can be tough on their haters and who can just be like, fuck off, I'm doing me and I'm doing great. But yeah, not everybody is built like that. Not everybody wants to shrug it off, and they shouldn't be forced into doing so because it looks better, it looks tougher and more composed. And I will also say, I think it's easier to troll people that are strangers. It's the people you know, though. Those are the ones that can be real tricky because you want to believe that there is a greater depth there in that relationship. And so when the person shows that that depth is clearly not there, it's just really tough because, I think with time and space, we kind of have rosy colored glasses. Like, I even remember with my aunt, like, she wasn't there at first when we got to the house. And I was like, oh, where is she? Like, I'm excited to see her. I just think back to, oh my God, because now I never want to see her. But yeah, like, it's just, the people you know are super tricky because it's just like, you always want to believe that there's just more there. And so it's much more heartbreaking when you realize, nah, there's not much here at all. So yeah, I say all this to say that I highly agree that vulnerability is not weakness, and that if we don't take the time to acknowledge where those tender spots are, we actually run the risk of stumbling upon hurt when we least expect it. And it's even funnier to think about now because it's not like I didn't expect the fat phobia, right? Like, I totally prefaced everything to my boyfriend. Like, I knew it would come. I did not expect her to be as gross about it as she was. And I think that's what was so challenging. I still think in this moment, like, it brought me back to being a little kid. And like, because I was really overweight as a kid, and everyone just, again, it was like nothing else about me mattered but the fact that I was overweight. And, you know, as a kid, I didn't really understand what it meant to be dehumanized. But as an adult, I definitely do. And, you know, it's just, again, all I can say is that it just feels so sad when you recognize that there are people who can't see the value that you bring outside of being a particular size. But going back to the dog example I've been using, dogs show their bellies to people that they trust, but they don't just throw that trust out to anyone and everyone. That trust has to be gained. If they show their belly and you kick them, there's a high likelihood that they aren't going to show you their belly anymore, and that they're much more likely to be on guard whenever you're around going forward. But that doesn't mean that the dog will never show their belly again. If another person comes along and earns their trust and shows them that they care, dogs will usually take that risk and show them their belly. This is exactly what being vulnerable is all about. We will always run the risk of someone betraying us or hurting us when we show them our tender side. But how amazing is it when we find those people that give us belly rubs and cuddles? Wouldn't you say that it was worth the fear of potentially being hurt to find that love and affection? Like, yeah, I now think my uncle's wife sucks, and that relationship has been downgraded for me. But it also allowed me to upgrade the relationship that I have with my boyfriend and feel so much closer to him. And then, okay, so going back to the dogs, when my boyfriend and I first got Harlow, who's our dog, he was not about my boyfriend at all. We believed that whoever owned him before us was a man who was not nice to him. So when he came to live with us, my boyfriend had to work a little harder to earn his trust. But once Harlow learned that my boyfriend wasn't like his previous owner, his life is now full of so many cuddles and belly rubs, all because he was vulnerable enough to give another man a shot. So expressing vulnerability is always going to have some potential risk for hurt and messiness, but we cannot let that outweigh the positive benefits of increasing our sense of love and belongingness. All right, so now that we have an understanding of vulnerability as strength and not weakness, let's also talk about another common misconception about vulnerability, which is that vulnerability is letting it all hang out and telling everyone everything there is to know about us. That is not vulnerability. That is oversharing. Within Platonic by Marissa Franco, she writes that oversharing is a defense mechanism. We engage in it as a way to protect ourselves against the anxieties of rejection. She writes that instead of acknowledging these fears, we overshare in the hopes that doing so will draw someone closer to us. It is compensating for our insecurities and occurs compulsively, like a twitch to reduce our anxieties, whereas true vulnerability occurs deliberately after we discern that we are safe. Brene also writes that vulnerability is based on mutuality and requires boundaries and trust. It's not oversharing, it's not purging, it's not indiscriminate disclosure, and it's not celebrity-style social media information dumps. Vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and experiences with people who have earned the right to hear them. God, I love me some Brene Brown, y'all. Like, I first read this book when I was 21, 22, and anyone who knows me knows that I am a book purist. I hate marking up my books. I even get pissed when, like, you know, a book will be in the bargain bin and they'll have a bargain bin sticker on it. And I'm like, why did you have to put sticker on the book? Because it's going to take me so much time to get the sticker off the book. So I hate doing anything to my books. But Daring Greatly just had so many gems that I never wanted to lose that it is one of the few books that I own that is full of underlines and sticky notes, and it's all marked up. So really great stuff. And so I think I mentioned in a past episode that influencers can make me really uncomfortable when I'm scrolling sometimes, because the overarching goal as an influencer is to be relatable. And that's because if you're relatable, it means that you can sell things because people will either want to be like you or see themselves in you. And so a lot of influencers in their quest to be relatable, they will actually end up oversharing and doing what Brene calls emotional floodlighting. This is when people share really deep things about themselves, but the trust isn't really there yet. And so for the person on the receiving end, you feel similarly to a deer in headlights. You're just kind of like blindsided and confused. And so I love this distinction that Brene makes. There's a big difference between being vulnerable and using vulnerability. A lot of influencers and those that are unwilling or unknowing use vulnerability to fake a sense of relationship building. Being vulnerable, again, takes time and involves boundaries. It involves taking the time to assess whether or not the people you are sharing with can actually bear the weight of your truth. And real talk, whether or not they are truly worthy of seeing you in totality. One of my favorite metaphors from Daring Greatly that I swear I will use to explain vulnerability to my children is the marble jar story that Brene uses with her daughter. So basically, Brene's daughter comes home upset from school one day because she told a secret to a girl who told everyone else in the class, and then a few students started to bully her about her secret, which, fuck that girl, she's clearly not a girl's girl. And so her daughter, she comes to this conclusion that she's like, I'm never going to tell anyone my secrets ever again. I'm never going to be vulnerable, never going to open myself up. And in her daughter's class, the teacher had this marble jar that she would fill with a few marbles when she saw students engaging in good behavior. But she would also take marbles out when students were engaging in poor behavior, like when they were bullying her daughter, Ellen. Her daughter's name is Ellen. So Brene teaches Ellen about vulnerability and how to make judgment calls on when to be vulnerable through this metaphor of the marble jar. She tells her to think about friendships as marble jars. So whenever someone is kind, supportive, or guarding of her secrets, she says you would put marbles in their jar, meaning that going forward, these are people that are demonstrating all of the qualities that mean you can continue to build trust with them and continue to be vulnerable with them. However, if people are mean or they don't keep secrets, then you take marbles out, meaning that in the future, these are not people that we continue to bare our souls and our secrets to. And I just loved this metaphor so much because it's such a great visual signifier to how we can think about when we increase our vulnerability with others. Ellen and Brene brainstorm in that moment what it means to have quote unquote marble jar friends. And some examples that they offer are they keep our secrets, they tell us their secrets, they remember our birthdays, they know and remember the names of people in our families, they know when we're sad and they ask why, they always make sure that I'm included, and they check on me when I'm sick. And so Brene emphasizes with Ellen that we don't just give marbles away. They have to be earned because trust is built one marble at a time. So as we conclude for today, again, I just want to reiterate that expressing vulnerability is always going to be scary. That is built into the process. However, if we take calculated risk and assess how many marbles people have earned from us in the past for engaging in trustworthy behavior, then we will always better position ourselves to be vulnerable with the right people. And don't be afraid to be vulnerable first. If the tolerance has been built properly and you are not oversharing, then people are not only much more likely to view you positively, but they will likely want to be vulnerable with you and increase the depth in your relationship with them. But you cannot use vulnerability to make friends. If you share deep truths about yourself without making someone earn that vulnerability, it will more likely alienate them from you because they will get that deer in the headlights feeling. And lastly, your silence will not protect you. I have to remind myself of this all the time, even though it's tattooed on my body. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes or some tears slip out. No one is entitled to making you feel bad or silencing your feelings just because they don't want to take accountability for their words or actions. Remember that people who care about you never want to hurt you. And so if you make it clear that what they are doing or saying is bothering you, and all they have is excuses for why they should should be able to do as they please, that's valuable information. That is your cue to say, girl bye, boy bye, person bye, because they will never be worth the marbles, okay? Let me not say never, okay? Sometimes people do change, but you have to assess, just like I did with my uncle's wife, whether or not seeing them grow is worth the potential of them hurting you in the future. Some people are not going to be worth it, and that's okay. The ones that will be worth it will make it abundantly clear. Y'all met my best friend D in a prior episode, and back in the day, I used to call everyone and everything a bitch, okay? What's my favorite word? Bitch. Honestly, it still kind of is to this day, but back then, I used to use it really chaotically. And D sat me down, and she said, Daysha, do not call me a bitch. I know some people are cool with being called someone's bitch as a term of endearment, but I'm not. And I said, oh, word? Bet. And I have never called her one again because I loved her and our relationship way more than I loved using the word bitch. And I actually had the same situation pop up with my boyfriend where like I was using a particular word when I would be mad and he'd be like, can you not call me that when you're mad? And I was like, even though with him, he's always saying that like my curse words aren't creative enough. So I got real creative and he did not like this. So, but yeah, you know, for me, it's when you bring shit up like that with me, that's just it. It's not something worth fighting about, in my opinion, because this is an issue of respect. And for me, respect is an important value. I always want people who are my friends or my romantic partners or just close to me to feel respected. So the minute you make it clear that I'm doing something that feels disrespectful, I clock it and adjust. I might not be perfect at first, but I will actively do my best to honor you because that's literally what friendship is about. So feel the fear and be vulnerable anyway. Let people know that it's hard for you and know that it is better to speak your piece and risk rejection than to stay silent and stuck in a musty, crusty, dusty friendship, okay? That is my word for the week. Don't do it. I speak from musty, crusty, dusty friendship experience, okay? As always, if you are having any thoughts, feelings, or revelations that you want to share with me, please feel free to hit me up on social media, within our free Facebook group, or on our exclusive Patreon, where we have so many great bonuses. And also, let me know if there are any mental health professionals that you love and would want to see featured on the podcast. I would love to reach out to them and see what I can make happen. And you know what? They actually don't. I mean, I obviously interview a lot of mental health professionals, but if there's anyone else that's really interesting that you think would be someone that would be fun to talk to or you want to hear, let me know. All right, besties. Happy Halloween. I'll catch you next time. Your girl is out. Loving Real Talk Friend Therapy? Of course you are. So don't forget to show us some love with a 5-star review wherever you are listening and to join our Patreon to unlock bonus recordings, videos, private chats, and more.